Hi, it's Jen again, and today I want to talk a little bit about creating stories for visual novels. And like many of my videos, I don't like to go necessarily into step by step, like you should do A, B, C, D, like a lot of other instructional videos approach to like kind of giving people advice for starting projects. And it's because at the core, I don't see creating art being so much about the construction of the project as I do about art as a whole being about deconstruction. So what I mean by that is that, like when somebody is studying how to draw human figures, they will be told, you need to learn about the underlying anatomy. You need to study and observe, expression, and learn about those sorts of things, and about like posing. There'll be some different things about how gravity, how your posture will like react to gravity and stuff like that. So, and how the body moves in like arcs and stuff like that. So, yeah, there's a lot of things to kind of like observe and to think about while you're constructing your figure. But I would argue that deconstructing the human body and how it moves and how it expresses and how it's affected by things like gravity and in motion, how it's affected by things like momentum and stuff like that. Those are all somewhat more important than the actual construction, because when you're constructing art, you're taking the ideas that you deconstructed and you're reconstructing them, hopefully by being able to emphasize and exaggerate the idea to better portray that to your audience. And this goes along with all forms of art besides drawing, writing, and all that other stuff. And so I want to talk about writing and creating a project from the standpoint of focusing on your deconstruction first, because a lot of people I've been working with, I find that they are struggling with like kind of cementing their idea. And if you don't have a good, kind of like when I talked about starting your project, if you don't have a good idea of what it is exactly that you're trying to convey, if you don't have a clear path in your mind, then it makes it harder to stick to a project, and it makes it harder to construct, because you don't really know what you're trying to focus on, and you don't really know what it is you're trying to emphasize. And so how are you going to be able to convey your message to your audience who needs to kind of have this exaggerated construction of your idea if you don't have a clear understanding of what it is you're trying to deconstruct? So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I ended up working on Soul Union and kind of some of what I was struggling with or thinking about as I was creating the project. And it wasn't that I started the project with like all of my messaging clearly in mind. Some of it kind of evolved, and I got a better understanding of what it is I was trying to deconstruct as I was working on it. But it was something that I needed to be consciously aware of in order to try to get my messaging across. And I don't necessarily mean that in a way that's like, oh, I'm going to be preaching from the pulpit, like my message, and I'm gonna like ram it down people's throats, and they better get my message or else I'm a failure. Maybe as I'm explaining my goals and my messages and like the things I was focusing on deconstructing, for anybody who's played Soul Union, maybe you'll disagree and you'll say, okay, I didn't get that at all from your game, and that's perfectly okay. But I needed to be conscious of what the messaging and the game meant to me as I was working on it, in order to have a clear direction in where I was going and to try to kind of refocus my efforts every time something didn't feel quite right or something felt like it was missing, it helped to kind of go back and think, okay, what exactly am I trying to accomplish with this project at the core of it? So when I started with the idea of Soul Union, it was just a fantasy adventure that revolved around a child who was adopted, and it was, you know, I was just kind of creating characters that I thought seemed cool to me, and it was just, yeah, it was just something fun, and I didn't even think about how my own adoption had any part of like creating a character who was an adoptee, because it was just such a normal and widely used kind of, you know, spurring on the adventure, like a reason for a young person to kind of have to go off on their own. You know, they lost their family. That's like used in like so many hero adventure stories. So it never really struck me as like, okay, I'm trying to say a specific thing. I'm trying to explore a certain topic. And it wasn't until I like kind of revisited Soul Union over a decade later, you know, after I had my son, and I was kind of exploring a lot of like what my adoption, how my adoption had effect on my childhood and my early development, and how I was going to be more aware of these things as I was bringing up my son, to not just kind of go along with the flow and do as I'm told, you know, when I'm parenting, but to be very conscientious in what I'm doing as I'm parenting, with my own memories of childhood development in mind, and you know, base it more on experience and evidence and biology than necessarily what like society is just kind of telling me to do. So as I was thinking and researching all these things, it made me think more about Soul Union and like what I was actually trying to say in that story, other than just like, oh, it's a fun fantasy adventure. Like, why did I choose those particular ideas? Why did I create this particular character? What did it really mean to me at the core? And so it was always about like finding acceptance and not really feeling like you completely belong with any particular tribe. So in Soul Union, there's like 3 different tribes of like human and beast and elves, and they are separate races, completely separate cultures. And this the main character, who at the time was Mikhail, who was a human who was raised by these beasts, and ends up kind of being confronted by the ghost of his dead sister, and has to kind of go off and explore the world to try to avenge her death, and ends up interacting more with like the other tribes. And so the story was really about like kind of my feeling of displacement growing up in the United States as somebody who is obviously of Asian of Asian descent or whatever, but has no actual, like, not culturally Asian at all, but always being treated as though I am culturally Asian. So yeah, a lot of it had to do with kind of those types of themes, because as a pretty still young person, like, you know, as a young teenager and in my early 20s, I was still trying to form my identity, and it was still a very raw, you know, issue in my head. Now that I'm older and I feel more comfortable in my self-identity, I have a different take, you know, on like the themes that I wanted to explore. And so I ended up shifting from having Mikhail be the main character to having Ilian be the main character, because Ilian was kind of like he was kind of like a villain turned hero in the original story, and I thought his growth was more interesting to explore, as far as like kind of that development from being a antagonist to becoming somebody who eventually became more empathetic and less cynical. And I felt that that was more reflective of kind of like the journey that I had more recently been on or was trying to undergo. And the reason why I chose to make it a dating sim was because I was interested in visual novels, but to be quite honest, one of the things that I wanted to kind of subvert in dating sims that I was not like a huge fan of was this whole idea of trying to guess what the love interest would want you to answer and then being rewarded for it. I didn't think that this was a very healthy way to interact with people. And even though it's something as like cheesy as like a game, I didn't think it was something. I wanted to have a different take on that because I didn't think that it was I guess necessarily a harmless attitude to have. Like, I'm at a point in my life where I am interested in having genuine connections with people. I want to get to know who they are, and maybe we will get along and maybe we won't, but I'm not interested in like just interacting with people on this surface level where they are just telling me what they think I want to hear. And I don't want to have that interaction with people either, where I'm just like forced to kind of like just constantly be telling people what I think they want to hear, because it's tiring. And honestly, I'm getting too old. I don't have enough time left in my life to keep worrying about that kind of stuff. I just want to have genuine interactions with people, and I want to make genuine connections. Like, that's what's meaningful to me. And so I wanted to reflect that in my dating, my take on dating sims. So in Soul Union, originally there was a mechanic to have to lose affection points and to lose trust points by making certain answers. And maybe on paper that sounds like a reasonable mechanic, and it sounds maybe more realistic than not losing those points. But I realized in my focus overall with having this take place in Ilian's soul and having this be a journey of him kind of confronting that his cynicism is widely born of self-protection and not wanting to be perceived as vulnerable to others, and how this has isolated him, and how that isolation has led him to a very like self-destructive and nihilistic future. Whether or not people have gotten that from the story, I didn't want to make it blatant, so maybe you've played the game and you didn't get that from it at all. But regardless, the companions will always be respectful of Ilian. So if you want to be in a romantic relationship with him, or you want to be in a friendship relationship with him, then they will go along with that. And there is no like wrong answers that you can say that will deter them from having any type of relationship with Ilian. You can't like sabotage their relationship in that way. Like, they won't just like give up on him like because you didn't tell them what they want to hear. Because at the core, it's about Ilian kind of accepting himself and allowing himself, or I guess in some ways in this case being forced to be vulnerable to another person. To that authentic self is on display to this observer who's kind of just like following him along this journey. And then he comes to realize that it's okay to be his authentic self, that he can find acceptance there. And that is kind of what saves him from the void of, I guess, it would be hopeless nihilism, to kind of surrendering to that very almost suicidal future, is that he can accept himself because he realizes that, you know, somebody else can see his vulnerable self and accept him. And so having a mechanic where you can where your companion can like dislike you for whatever you answer, whether it's a good answer or a bad answer, would really detract, you know, from that overall messaging. So the core message was that I believe that in order to have genuine relationships with people, we kind of have to like let ourselves be vulnerable and open ourselves up to being rejected, and that might hurt, but ultimately, you know, that is, in my opinion, the only way to make meaningful connections with people. And those types of meaningful connections will help you to feel, or protect you from feeling lonely, you know, and hopeless in this world. I didn't really have any of like that part where you can get rejected and then you have to keep on going, because I really wanted to just focus on the self-acceptance part and the making a meaningful connection, but in order to do so, having to be vulnerable, to kind of being exposed as your true self. So those are some of the things that kept me going and that I had in mind as I was making Soul Union, is that I really wanted to explore themes of self-identity. I really wanted to subvert that one aspect of dating sim visual novels, and those were really the two major focus that I had in mind as I was going through that game, is that I really feel that self-acceptance and that is like the core component to being able to have a healthy relationship with anybody, and so it had to be a big part of this game, and it ended up being the sole focus of that game. So I didn't really I kind of discarded a whole bunch of other aspects of the original Soul Union story, and I just focused on that one thing, and I was surprised on oh, I'm actually able to make this like a full-fledged game. I thought maybe it would be like a short game, oh, maybe it'll be a couple hours long, and then it ended up being able to be like a whole lot more material than I thought I would have, just narrowing down this one aspect, and trying to put all my creative energy and all my creative my storytelling and my character development and my focus on just that core idea. And I've always had a hard time kind of summarizing my projects and my ideas. And I think that I guess my one strength that I've kind of had, or I guess defines a lot of my storytelling throughout the years, is I've always kept it very honest to my own ideas and my own self. I haven't really created things with an audience in mind, and some people might see that as being a weakness as a creator, but it's always something that's the people who have been able to connect to my work have appreciated, and it's always something that's kept me a very prolific creator. It's always given me a lot of motivation to just produce a lot of work. So yeah, in a lot of words, I would just encourage other creators and aspiring creators to try to focus on your deconstruction aspect of creating your art. A lot of tutorials and a lot of advice givers will get caught up in talking about the execution aspect, the construction aspect of art, because that is the physical manifestation, that people see you working on. But in my mind, when you're creating art, deconstruction is the most important step. And it is the step that people really struggle with, or they gloss over, or they jump into their project without really fully deconstructing their ideas, and it makes them feel kind of lost and out of focus and kind of all over the place when they're trying to construct, if they haven't taken the time to really deconstruct what their messaging is. And I would advise for people who are maybe starting out, to try to narrow down that message, that theme, that core of your idea to something as simple as possible, because you'd be surprised at how much it takes to get across just that one idea. I ended up making an entire game around that just one little idea, and yeah, it is almost like the material writes itself. Like once you've fully deconstructed something, and you have that message really solidified in your mind, of the core of what it is that's really driving you to create this world and create this story and create this project, everything else starts to almost kind of write itself. And at any point you start to feel like something's going off the rails, you can always have that core deconstruction to go back to help you refocus. With my newest project, Hungry, I have another core idea that I've just recently kind of had that breakthrough after working on this project on and off for a long time. So the original comic was a 200-page, I think, graphic novel that I made back in like was it 2015 maybe, and then I've tackled it. I tackled it initially as a visual novel, kind of RPG hybrid, back in maybe 2021, and I wasn't happy with how the combat system worked back then. It was too focused on trying to incorporate all these RPG mechanics, and it just wasn't fun, and it wasn't really getting across my ideas very well, and so then I gave up on it. And now I've been working on it again for maybe a couple months now. I've been thinking about it and putting stuff together. And it's only now that I finally have settled in on what exactly I'm trying to say, that I finally deconstructed it to like that kind of that one idea that I'm like, okay, I've got this going on, that going on, and I think it's about this, and I think it's about that, and I think it's about that. And I'm like, wait a second. I finally get it. So I wouldn't say you have to fully deconstruct your idea in order to start on it. In fact, you probably can't fully deconstruct your idea until you start working on it, because you really have to spend a lot of time with your ideas in order to fully understand what it is you're trying to say. That I just would keep that in mind, that it is definitely something that you're going to want to keep thinking about and keep like reassessing, like is this what I really wanted to say? And when you have that, it is going to just make everything else fall in place. All right, take care, enjoy the process, and that's all I got to say for now. Bye.